idea. Men have so many great ideas. And this one was to get a motorhome and put a bunch of teenagers in it. Of course, you know about that. And I just thought it was the most ludicrous thing I'd ever heard in my entire life. I told David that, I told God that, I told a few other people that, and I just thought it was stupid. How are you going to pack teenagers in a motorhome and impact culture in any positive way whatsoever? Beginning with my own personal culture. I couldn't see how this was going to be a good thing. And it turned out that it actually was a tremendous thing. On the very first ground tour in 1999, and this is just a little fun fact that I thought you'd enjoy because here we are now, I was invited to speak at the National Homeschooling Conference to the leaders of the state homeschooling leaders across the country about training in public speaking and in debate, and that happened here at Regent University. While I was here, I went over to the education department and I interviewed for a doctoral program. I had known for some time that I would want to pursue my own education and equipping, and I thought that would be the right way to do it. I had great conversations. I thought this is the answer, this is the place, this will be great, and of course the time wasn't right. And we can see that God clearly redirected me for the right time and the right thing. In 2000, I co-founded NCFCA, and we took the reins from HSLDA. Some of you know those acronyms. That's the National Christian Forensics and Communications Association for homeschoolers. At the time, I said, I will do this, but I don't believe this is only supposed to be for homeschoolers. The people that I worked with knew that I felt very strongly about that, and I will be looking for the day when we have a program that we can expand beyond them. I also will be looking for the day. In fact, immediately I developed individual speaking events because HSLDA just had policy debate. So we developed the individual speaking events and we developed a different kind of debating. I said we need another style. Policy debate's fine for a few people, but it takes over your life. And we need something else that we can do so that we can hone and develop these skills. That seed was planted for me in those days for what we now have in the Institute, which is a different style of debate that I believe is even closer to mirroring what happens in the public forum. Not because I didn't like these styles of debate as a training ground, but because I didn't think they quite got us back to the public forum to use those skills in the places that we really want to use them. In 2002, we moved to Tennessee, which is important to remember because that's the time when we got a little bit more centrally located so we could be doing more of this. And we also developed the community speaking track in the Communicators for Christ conference. This is when we knew we're equipping Christians to communicate with culture. So if they only communicate on these competitive platforms, they're not going to get out. They start sounding like each other. In fact, if you go to a college forensics program, you can almost tell. You can just tell, right? Big nodding head. Thank you so much. I'll pay you later, Josh. But it's true, though, because there's a sound and a style and even a kind of gesturing and even a way that you're supposed to move to make your points. And so what I embarked on then, yeah, big nodding heads here too. What I embarked on then was I was intentional about helping young people come out of the competitive, refining, competition, practice environment into the public platform. And for the next several years, what I did is I took some of the most decorated young people in the country, I brought them on as interns and spent their entire internship untraining them to retrain them to make real connections with real audiences. And somewhere along the way, I said to myself, this is not the training that we need then if we're equipping Christians to communicate with culture, because we knew that's what we were doing. In 2002, I founded the Communicators Advantage Project, which is the publishing and consulting arm of the Institute for Cultural Communicators, because I was committed, I'm sorry I went a little too fast, committed to equipping Christians. And I also, in 2004, resigned from the NCFCA Board of Directors. A lot of people didn't realize that I resigned that long ago, but my commitment was to equipping Christians to communicate with culture. And I knew that I needed to spend more time in ICC helping to make that happen. In 2004, we also launched some programs for leadership. One of the things that happened in those days, and some of you have come, were around, some of you have come since that time, but the motorhome pulled into town and we said, hey, y'all ought to do this. Here's how you speak, here's how you debate, you need to take these skills, you need to go find some place and do it. And then we left. And maybe we came somewhere near you the following year, but probably we didn't. You had to drive a long ways. And that was it. That's all there was. So there wasn't this community that you could plug into, and we hadn't really developed anything for you to do in between. So at that point, we realized communicators are leaders. Leaders are communicators. The person who has the idea isn't the one that gets to make the impact with it. It's the person that communicates the idea that gets to impact society and culture and community with it. And so communicators are leaders and leaders are communicators. We had to train leadership skills, and I was beginning to see that there were communicators, well trained, excellent, polished, refined communicators that were leading, because communicators lead in the wrong direction. And that's when the seeds were planted for communicating out of character. And we recognized that. So we built these programs for character and leadership because we knew, we didn't have the whole picture, but we knew that we needed that much more of it. We needed people to be practicing leadership grounded in character. And we began to attempt to offer some of that along the way. In 2005, we had our first speech camp. It was the very first time that we brought kids together to practice certain kinds of speeches, and I think that it would be fun, just a little forecasting here, for us to begin to have camps all over the country, and even in other parts of the world one day, but all over the country in the summertime, that would just help people really refine some of those skills, get some sort of more directed, maybe more intensive kinds of coaching, so that we could really practice some real skill building in those times. But we've done a little bit of retooling there. I also was recruited to go back to NCFCA for their judge orientation program for judges and tournament staffing, and to be able to help them in the way that administration happened and the way that coaching happened toward the practice environment. Now, I was excited about that opportunity between Communicators for Christ and NCFCA because I was committed to authentic leadership. I understood that we need to lead authentically, and there was a sense at the time that maybe there wasn't transparency, and a lot of it was because everybody didn't know how things happen. And so I thought if I could come and help there to be a consistency and help people to know what we're really trying to do, and everybody could get on the same page, how easy that would be. Boy, did I have a lot to learn. Because as I traveled the country, one of the things I began to recognize is we can create a new rule for anything. We can do it in ICC too. We can create a new rule for anything. And in the East, they will add rules to help us follow that rule. And in the South, they will ask a lot of questions, and then they will kind of cushion the rule so you're not offended by the fact that it sounds like a rule. And the West Coast, it's really not a rule, it's a suggestion. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, anywhere you go in the country, you kind of run into some of this anyway. And that is just right here amongst a subculture, within a culture, a relatively homogeneous subculture as cultures go. I mean, think about that for a minute. Christian, homeschool, speakers and debaters, I mean, it's hard to get a whole lot more marginal. Like, we'd have to go to one denomination and still we wouldn't quite be. But I mean, it's hard to further marginalize that. So we're a fairly homogeneous culture, and we still have difficulty understanding it. But that's why I was so committed to that, and it helped me learn a lot about organization and leadership. About that time, I began to have a nagging question that just followed me. Sometimes it would be on my mind as I would go to sleep. Sometimes it would be on my mind as I would wake up. It would be on my mind as I would pray. And remember, in these days, we didn't have the Institute yet. We hadn't launched it yet. We had Communicators for Christ, and so it was me. And during a certain period of the year, it was teenagers that I worked with as interns. And then it was the folks that I worked with in NCFCA. And so I didn't really have an advisory council or a national leadership team or my own board of directors that I could consult for some of these things. We didn't have area coordinators and state coordinators in CFC or ICC to feed us from the field. We had a very different practice environment that was a little bit more narrowly defined in terms of who it was there to meet the needs for. And so I began to ask the question, what happens if I don't show up for a conference? What will happen to the organization? What happens if I have a whole season where I can't show up to conferences? Now, I had never felt like the world depends on me, or the sun rises and sets according to me, or any of that. But I did start having this question: who would do it? Who would do this? And I began to think with a little bit more of a future focus. Who's going to continue this? Because we haven't trained people in the right season of life to really carry this work on. So who would see that this continued to happen? And I didn't have an answer for that. That was bothersome to me. So in 2006, when I was in Georgia, and Sally McIntosh said, hey, have you ever thought about establishing your nonprofit? I said, well, as a matter of fact, I have thought about establishing a nonprofit. But I've worked in a nonprofit, and a few nonprofits actually, and I've helped to co-found other organizations, and I've helped to co-found nonprofits, and I realized it can be a little tricky because other people can have different ideas than you do. And it may not go where you wanted it to go when you started it. And I was a little bit scared about that idea. And so I had resisted it. And then we had counselors and we talked to different people and they said, you know, here are some concerns, and I'd always kind of talked myself out of it. But Sally McIntosh said, well, what if you do set up the nonprofit? I think it's really the way to go. So I said, well, here's what we'll do. We'll establish, and we kind of had this name for a while, and so I had a few teenagers there, and we talked it over at night, and at midnight in the fall of that year, in Sally's office, we sat down and we filed the paperwork for the Institute for Cultural Communicators to be a separate arm of Communicators for Christ. Who knew that the Institute for Cultural Communicators was the real deal, and Communicators for Christ was a small part of that? But at the time, I couldn't even see that far. And I think it's good for you to know that, because a lot of times I think God leads that way. We know we need to do this thing right now. We don't know where it fits in the whole picture yet. We don't know. We don't have all the pieces. But we know it's this part, and so we can be faithful to do that part. In 2007, we celebrated our 10th anniversary. So who was there? Who was at the 10th anniversary? Hands high. Who was at the 10th anniversary? Thank you so much for still being here. Wow, that is amazing. We celebrated our 10th anniversary. That is the year that we went to Masters and everybody got sick. Everybody. Everybody. The staff room was like the infirmary. And the McLean, like our motto for the staff was just take drugs. So we just said, Dr. McLean just came through and he just dispensed them. He just took anything we could do to patch people up and help them go out. And so these kids literally, they would go out and they would teach workshops and they would come back and they would lay down. They would get up and they'd go teach a workshop and they'd come back and they'd just lay down. And then some of them would say, you're done for the day, and we send them back to their host town. So it was unbelievable. We couldn't even run the whole tournament. We had kids just dropping over. It was ridiculous. But that was our 10th anniversary year. We did have a big celebration too. We did more than just get sick, but we remember a lot about that. So we also piloted chapters, and I remember people looking at me like I was from another planet. Like, what in the world is that, and what do you need it for? And right there, we began to see that there were some real distinctions between the people who had been coming to Communicators for Christ events. People came for different purposes. And that's okay. People are still going to come to your chapter for different purposes. And that's okay. Because any touch point we get is a touch point we get. And people are free to decide they want just this much of us and then go somewhere else. And then that's all they had. Sometimes those people come back later and they say, I'm seeing something else here. I didn't get everything that I was looking for yet. And that's okay too. But we had some people who didn't understand what we were trying to do with chapters, but I was forecasting because I began to understand this. We knew we needed to train in competence, and not incompetence, train competence, okay? We knew we needed to train competence. We knew we needed to train character, but the missing piece for me until this year, until 2007, was you do that in community. And I hadn't got that. I hadn't got that the big missing piece was like-minded local community. And how many of you know, since you began to work in chapters, the difference that it's made for the kinds of skills that you get? What a difference when you come together with people who want the same thing you do. And you share that together. And parents share that together. And so we bring kids together. And they're still knuckleheads. The kids are still knuckleheads when they come to us. But at least we have parents that want the same thing. And we can work on it together. So we knew competence, character, and community was the missing piece. We also knew it would reshape the culture and the landscape of the organization. I can remember saying chapters will completely reshape the landscape, and I had no idea it would look like today. And that was only 5 years ago. It wasn't that long. But wow, has it reshaped everything. In 2008, we unveiled Young Speakers Guild Training 1, and 2. We started developing relationships with other organizations such as the National Association of University Model Schools, where this year's intern team and I will hold their keynote spots at their 10th anniversary. So that is a huge recognition of what ICC is bringing now to private Christian schools, and we're pretty excited about that. That's the foundations. We laid the foundations for our national leadership team. They began meeting together in the summer, and we recognized the importance of building relationships and of meeting in person. You know, today we're moving rapidly toward the virtual organization and toward all communicating remotely, but we still have that need for touch. We have tech and touch, and we still need to touch, and we need those touch points with real people. And we began developing those just strong relationships that I am so grateful for. It's kind of fun for me because when I talk with my colleagues, you know, we're studying organizational leadership together here in doctoral studies, and we read case studies and we talk together. And I talk about getting excited about meeting with my board, getting excited about meeting with my leadership team, getting excited about meeting with our advisors. And it's sort of such a foreign concept to most CEOs and executive directors and other people I talk with, because board meetings aren't exciting and their policy making meetings aren't exciting. And I find ours terribly exciting because we recognize that we're shaping the future through the decisions that we make. And so we feel that. The official launch of ICC was in 2009. And in that same year, we made a proposal to formally partner with NCFCA, and the board rejected that. They said, no, we think that we're doing what we want to be doing, and we said, okay, that's our answer, now we know. And I was completely free to spend all of my time devoted to ICC. And they said if we want any further education or if we want an educational arm, we'll establish it ourselves. But you can do what you're doing, and we'll continue to do what we're doing. And so that was a very clear sign. It became very obvious to me then where I was free to spend all of my time, and we can see how God has worked in that. International, though, it's kind of funny because Lisa Kays came to announce. She was the first board member. She and Sally were the first two board members on board, and then we pulled the rest of the board together. And so Lisa made the announcement at the unveiling at that Masters that year of the Institute for Cultural Communicators, but she slipped, and she said the International Cultural Communicators. And as soon as we talked about that, after that assembly, she said, oh no, I'm so sorry, I flubbed. And then she stopped and she said, oh, I really hope this was not prophetic. And I said, oh, Lisa, I really hope it was. So now she gets a little bit afraid when I have new ideas like that because she's afraid they're going to happen. So anyway, we had a lot of fun with that. We installed our prep program that you heard a little bit more about yesterday, that summer as well. We continued adding programs. A lot of you recognize a lot of these because we knew that we were looking for the future. We were beginning to be more and more future focused. We know we're preparing kids now for the future, but it was sort of still in the context of, we know we're shaping the future, but we were internally focused. We've got to train we've got to bring people in for prep because that helps them train in case maybe they want to be an intern. We've got to help them be in the student leadership role, so maybe they'll get ready to be an intern, so maybe they'll get ready to be another level of leader in the organization. We knew we wanted them to be leaders in society, but we didn't quite have that understanding that what we're really doing is we are sending all of these kids out. We are shaping the future in very real ways for kids who never move into higher leadership roles in the organization. Because of that presence that you have in your community, there's a shaping of the future that's happening across the board. So in 2010, we had a full coach track. We sunset a number of our activities. We had our last Masters Conference. We moved toward a different kind of a model at that time of year. We had Impact Singapore, our first international. Did you notice the timeline? January 2009, Lisa slipped. In January 2010, we're in Singapore. So I just love that. I love how God